Have you ever floated in the open ocean, miles from shore, with nothing beneath you but a gradient of blue fading into black? There is a primal, creeping sensation that grips you in those moments, the unshakable feeling that you are being watched from the abyss. We like to think of the ocean as a silent, empty wilderness, a place where life is simple and instinctual, driven only by hunger and fear. But what if I told you that in those depths, a mind as complex as ours is observing you, calculating your movements with a cold, alien logic? We have spent decades scanning the stars for signs of intelligent life, desperate for a signal from the void of space, all while ignoring the sentient gaze rising from our own seas. The ocean is not just water. It is a cradle for a consciousness so distinct from our own that meeting it is the closest we will ever come to an encounter with extraterrestrials. This isn't science fiction. It is a biological reality that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up when you realize what is swimming just beneath your feet. Meet the cephalopods, the octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish, the undisputed masters of this dark, fluid realm. They are an evolutionary anomaly, a branch of life that split from our ancestors over 600 million years ago, long before creatures ever crawled onto land. While we were building skeletons and centralizing our brains, they were dissolving their bodies into pure muscle and scattering their intelligence throughout their limbs. To look into the eye of an octopus is to look into a biological mirror that reflects a completely different solution to the problem of existence. They are not just smart for a fish or a mollusk. They possess a cognitive flexibility that rivals that of dogs, primates, and perhaps even young human children. But unlike a dog, which looks at you with devotion, an octopus looks at you with assessment, disassembling your intentions with a gaze that feels uncomfortably penetrating. They are the intelligent ghosts in the machine of the ocean, waiting silently in the wings of evolution. Imagine a creature whose mind is not confined to a skull, but flows like a current through every inch of its body. An octopus doesn't just have one brain. It has 9, a central commander and a dedicated neural cluster for each of its 8 arms. This means that its limbs can taste, touch, and decide independently, exploring a crevice or opening a shell while the central brain is busy watching for predators. It is a distributed consciousness, a nightmare of coordination where the body itself is a thinking entity capable of reacting faster than thought alone would allow. If you were to shake hands with an octopus, the arm touching you would be thinking about you, tasting your skin and making decisions without ever consulting the animal's main brain. This alien architecture allows them to multitask in ways we can barely comprehend, turning them into the ultimate fluid processors of information. But their intelligence isn't just internal. It is broadcasted on their skin in a dazzling, terrifying display of biological engineering. With millions of pigment-filled cells called chromatophores controlled by their nervous system, they can change their color and texture in milliseconds, faster than you can blink. They don't just blend in with the sand or coral to hide. They use their bodies as dynamic video screens to communicate emotion and intent. A flash of red for anger, a ripple of white for fear, or a mesmerizing, strobing pattern to hypnotize prey before the strike. In the darkness of the deep, they are shouting in a visual language we are only beginning to decode, a silent telepathy that renders spoken language obsolete. They can become invisible right before your eyes, vanishing into the background so perfectly that you could be staring directly at a lethal predator and see nothing but a rock. The stories of their problem-solving abilities in captivity read less like biology reports and more like prison break thrillers. Aquarium keepers tell hushed tales of octopuses that memorize the guard shifts, wait for the lights to go out, and then slip out of their tanks to steal crabs from neighboring exhibits before returning home, leaving no trace but a wet trail. There are records of octopuses that, out of sheer boredom or perhaps spite, learned to short-circuit the bright lights above their tanks by squirting precise jets of water at the electrical sockets. They can unscrew jars from the inside, navigate complex mazes, and even recognize individual human faces, holding grudges against keepers they dislike. This is not the behavior of a mindless automaton. It is the mark of a bored, frustrated intellect trapped in a world too small for its curiosity. So, here is the terrifying mystery that keeps marine biologists awake at night. If they are this smart, why aren't they ruling the planet? Why don't we see underwater cities of coral and bone, or complex tools forged in volcanic vents. By all accounts, they have the cognitive hardware to dominate the Earth. Yet they remain naked hunters in the dark, fleeting and solitary. The answer lies in a cruel biological trap, a glass ceiling that nature has placed over their potential to keep them from ascending. They are cursed with a metabolism that burns through life at a frantic pace, and a reproductive cycle that is essentially a death sentence. They are the tragic geniuses of the animal kingdom, granted the power to understand the world but denied the time to master it. The tragedy of the octopus is that every single one of them is an orphan, born into a lonely war for survival. They do not teach their young. The mother dies before her eggs hatch, and the father dies shortly after mating, leaving the babies to face the ocean completely alone. Every brilliant trick an octopus learns, how to open a crab trap, how to disable a shark, how to communicate, dies with it, lost forever to the void. They cannot pass knowledge down to the next generation, so every young octopus must reinvent the wheel, starting from zero in a hostile universe. Imagine if Isaac Newton had to relearn fire and the wheel before he could even think about gravity. That is the curse of the cephalopod. They are trapped in a loop of solitary brilliance, forever resetting, forever isolated. But what if the rules of the game are about to change? Evolution is not a static painting. It is a violent, dynamic process that thrives on chaos and pressure. As our oceans warm, acidify, and empty of their traditional apex predators, we are creating a new, high-stakes arena where intelligence is the only currency that matters. What happens if a mutation breaks the genetic lock on their lifespan, or if they begin to socialize in the ruins of the dying reefs? The biological leash that holds them back is fraying, and in the silence of the deep, the conditions are becoming perfect for a new kind of awakening. We are busy worrying about the monsters we create on land, but we should be looking down into the dark water where the solitary thinkers are waiting for their chance to connect. Evolution is often painted as a slow, majestic march, a gentle climb toward complexity over millions of years. We like to imagine it as a sculptor, chipping away at life with patience and precision. But that is a comforting lie. The truth is that the greatest leaps in history were not born of peace. They were forged in the fires of catastrophe. Think of the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs or the volcanic winters that choked the Permian skies. These were not just endings. They were violent, chaotic beginnings. When the world breaks, the old rules shatter with it, and in the smoking ruins of an ecosystem, nature doesn't just adapt. It panics. It throws every biological wild card it has onto the table, desperate to find something, anything that can survive the nightmare. And right now, if you look closely at our oceans, you can see the smoke rising again. We are standing on the edge of a new abyss, but this time the asteroid is us. The oceans are warming, turning acidic, and losing their breath, transforming into hostile chemical stews that would kill the fragile giants of the past. We are systematically emptying the seas of their kings, the sharks, the tuna, the whales, leaving behind a terrifying vacuum at the top of the food chain. Nature abhors a vacuum and it will fill it, but not with what was there before. When the lions are gone, the jackals don't just take their place. They change. They get smarter, faster, and crueler. We are stripping away the muscle of the ocean, and in doing so, we are inadvertently selecting for the one weapon we fear most: intelligence. Imagine a world where brawn is a liability. In a heating ocean, a massive body is just a massive target, a calorie-burning furnace that you can't afford to feed. The new rulers won't be the biggest. They will be the most efficient, the ones who can solve the puzzle of survival with the least amount of energy. This is the pressure cooker of the Anthropocene. It creates an evolutionary arms race where the prize doesn't go to the creature with the sharpest teeth, but to the one with the sharpest mind. We are forcing marine life into a cognitive corner, presenting them with a choice that is as simple as it is brutal. Get smart or die. This isn't about a fish learning to avoid a net. It's about a fundamental rewiring of the oceanic brain. In a chaotic, unpredictable environment, instinct is useless. Instinct tells you to run when you see a shadow, but what if the shadow is a trawler net that spans miles? Instinct tells you to migrate to colder waters, but what if the cold water is gone? The survivors of this new world will be the improvisers, the planners, the creatures that can look at a trap and understand the mechanism. We are breeding a generation of marine problem solvers, forcing them to develop memory, foresight, and strategy just to make it through the day. And here is where the horror begins to creep in. What happens when the predators of the deep stop chasing you and start anticipating you? Imagine a hunter that doesn't rely on speed, but on psychology. A creature that knows where you will hide before you do, because it has watched you, studied you, and learned your patterns. This is the birth of the thinking hunter, a predator that uses the environment as a weapon. It's the difference between being chased by a bear and being hunted by a human. One is a force of nature, the other is a calculated malice. And we are turning the ocean into a training ground for exactly this kind of mind. The isolation of the deep has always been a barrier to progress, keeping marine intelligence lonely and fragmented. But as the reefs die and the kelp forests collapse, the survivors are being pushed together into tighter and tighter pockets of habitable water. This forced proximity is the spark that could ignite a social revolution. In these crowded refuges, solitary hunters might find that cooperation is the only way to crack the defenses of a new, armored prey. We might see the birth of packs, not of wolves, but of squid or crustaceans, coordinating their attacks with a silent, terrifying efficiency. The lone genius of the octopus could be replaced by the terrifying synergy of the squad. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? That we are acting as the architects of our own replacement. Every time we acidify a reef or overfish a population, we are raising the difficulty level of the game, weeding out the dumb and the slow. We are curating a genetic pool of super survivors, distilling millions of years of evolution into a potent, concentrated liquor of cognitive potential. We are effectively running a global experiment to see just how smart a sea creature can get if you push it to the absolute brink of extinction. And the results of that experiment might be staring back at us sooner than we think. So, look at the ocean today and try not to see it as a victim. See it for what it really is, a laboratory. The heat is rising, the oxygen is dropping, and the pressure is building. The creatures that emerge from this bottleneck won't just be survivors. They will be the elite, the chosen few who looked into the face of the apocalypse and figured out a way to cheat it. In this new, hostile world, the lonely hunters must learn to speak, to plan, and perhaps, to remember who put them in this hell in the first place. The pressure cooker is whistling, and something brilliant and terrible is cooking inside. In the brutal new world forged by a changing climate, a solitary mind is no longer enough to survive. Intelligence, for all its brilliance, is a lonely flame in the crushing dark of the abyss. For a cognitive revolution to truly ignite, it needs a spark, and that spark is society. The isolated, ephemeral genius of the octopus is a tragic dead end. But what happens when survival forces a different path? What happens when the only way to endure the pressure cooker is to abandon solitude and learn to think together? This isn't just a hypothesis. It's a pattern we see across the history of life on Earth. The smartest creatures, from primates to crows to wolves, are all social. It seems the path to higher consciousness is not a ladder you climb alone, but a web you weave together. Now, imagine this social principle taking root in the alien ecosystems of the ocean floor. Picture the crustaceans, the crabs, the lobsters, the mantis shrimp, creatures encased in armor, armed with powerful claws, and driven by simple, relentless logic. Individually, they are formidable, but their intelligence is rigid, almost robotic. But what if environmental collapse forces them into massive, teeming colonies? What if, in the ruins of a bleached coral reef, they begin to form societies, not of individuals, but of tiny, armored drones? We could be witnessing the birth of something terrifyingly efficient. A hive mind, a single, distributed consciousness operating through thousands of bodies, an underwater equivalent of an ant colony or a termite mound. This is the horrifying beauty of swarm intelligence. In such a society, a single crab is nothing more than a neuron, a tiny processor in a vast, decentralized brain. It doesn't need to be brilliant on its own. It only needs to follow a few simple rules and react to the creatures next to it. Through this network of simple interactions, a staggering level of complexity can emerge. 1 million crabs, moving as one, could build elaborate fortress cities from sand and shell, farm algae in militarized gardens, and wage coordinated wars against rival hives. They would become a single superorganism, a thinking reef that stretches for miles, its thoughts rippling through the colony not as ideas, but as waves of synchronized movement. The mystery deepens when you consider how such a hive would communicate. On land, insects use pheromones, leaving chemical trails for others to follow. But in the fluid, three-dimensional world of the ocean, that system is too slow, too easily washed away. The language of a marine hive mind would need to be instantaneous, a biological internet woven into the very water itself. Imagine they evolve the ability to release complex cocktails of chemicals that transmit not just information, but sensations. A single crab feels the pain of a predator's attack, and in a flash, the entire colony feels a ghost of that pain, a jolt of collective fear that triggers an immediate, unified defense. Strategy would be transmitted as a scent, a command delivered as a taste on the current. Let's call this theoretical metropolis the Reef City. It would be a place of chilling mathematical order. Every citizen has a purpose, a caste, a function assigned at birth. There are no individuals, no rebels, no artists, only the cold, unfeeling logic of the swarm. To an outside observer, it would be a spectacle of eerie perfection. Millions of tiny eyes, all watching as one. Thousands of claws, all working in perfect unison to build, to harvest, to kill. The horror of the Reef City isn't in its monstrosity, but in its sanity. It is the ultimate expression of collective purpose, a society that has purged the messy, inefficient chaos of individuality for the sake of absolute survival. And what would be the goal of such a consciousness? Unlike an individual, a hive mind has no fear of death. It is functionally immortal as long as the colony survives. Its timescale would be geologic, its ambitions vast. It might not be interested in conquering the surface world, but in transforming its own. It could learn to manipulate ocean currents, trigger submarine landslides to bury its enemies, or even cultivate volcanic vents as a source of energy. It would become a planetary engineer, a force of nature with a mind, its motivations utterly alien and incomprehensible to our own individualistic perspective. It wouldn't hate us. It simply wouldn't care about us at all. This vision of a future ruled by crustacean hives might seem like far-fetched speculation, but the building blocks are already in place. We already see shrimp that live in cooperative colonies and crabs that decorate themselves for camouflage. Nature has already run this experiment on land with insects, creating some of the most successful and resilient societies on the planet. To think that it couldn't happen in the ocean, an environment far larger and more diverse than our own, is a failure of imagination. In the struggle for existence, evolution doesn't care about our sensibilities. It cares about what works. So, while we fixate on the mesmerizing individual genius of the octopus, we might be missing the bigger, more terrifying picture. The next great intelligence of the ocean may not have a face at all. It may not be a who, but a what, a sprawling, interconnected consciousness that thinks with 1 million bodies and speaks in a language of chemicals. As we peer into the future of the seas, we must ask ourselves a chilling question. Which is the greater threat? A single, brilliant mind trapped in a fragile body, or a single, implacable will distributed across an entire ecosystem? While the swarm conquers the reef, something much darker, and much, much older, is waking up in the abyss. While the crowded, sunlit reefs might become the cradle of a terrifying hive mind, the deep, open ocean harbors a different kind of dread. Down here, in the crushing darkness of the midnight zone, time doesn't tick, it drips. The creatures of the abyss are not frantic scuttlers like the crabs. They are ancient, silent drifters, biological submarines built for a world of immense pressure and scarce food. But what happens when you combine the extreme longevity of deep-sea giants with the capacity for deep thought? We know that some deep-sea sharks can live for over 400 years, swimming through the ocean since the time of Shakespeare. Now, imagine an intelligence that doesn't just live for centuries, but learns for centuries, accumulating memories and patterns over a lifespan that makes human history look like a blip. Let's focus on the deep-sea cephalopods, the giant squid and the colossal squid, the monsters of our oldest myths. For centuries, we thought of them as simple, violent beasts, thrashing blindly in the dark. But what if their immense brains are doing more than just coordinating their tentacles? In the cold, slow metabolism of the deep, thoughts might move at a glacial pace, but they would also be incredibly profound. And intelligence here wouldn't be reactive. It would be contemplative. A creature that encounters a predator once every decade doesn't need quick reflexes. It needs a perfect memory. It needs to recall the exact taste of the water, the precise vibration of a threat it last felt 200 years ago. This is the concept of the abyssal philosopher. A solitary mind drifting in the void, unburdened by the need for constant social chatter. Unlike the frantic, short-lived octopus of the reef, this creature has the luxury of time. It could spend decades solving a single problem, years analyzing the movement of a single current. We might be sharing our planet with thinkers that operate on a completely different temporal frequency, beings for whom a human lifetime is just a brief, frantic afternoon. They are the watchers in the dark, the silent recorders of the ocean's history, and their wisdom is as cold and crushing as the water that surrounds them. But the horror lies in the unknowable nature of their thoughts. What does a creature think about when it has floated in absolute darkness for 3 centuries? Does it dream? Does it formulate complex philosophies about the nature of hunger and silence? If we were to ever establish communication with such a being, we might find that its mind is so alien, so divorced from our terrestrial reality, that we couldn't understand a single concept it tried to convey. It would be like trying to explain the concept of fire to a glacier. We are terrified of meeting aliens from space, but we might find the most disturbing alien intelligence buried right here, under 4 miles of water. Consider the possibility of deep-sea gigantism applying to memory itself. We know that elephants never forget, and they live for 60 years. What is the memory capacity of a brain that has been growing and learning for 500? These creatures could be living archives of the ocean's trauma, remembering every shift in temperature, every chemical spill, every depth charge we've ever dropped. They might not just be animals. They might be the ocean's grudge, holding on to a silent, simmering awareness of everything we have done to their world. And unlike the forgiving, forgetful surface, the deep remembers everything. There is also the chilling question of what they do with this accumulated knowledge. Perhaps they are not just passive observers. Maybe they are planners. In the slow-motion world of the abyss, a plan could take a century to execute. They could be subtly altering their environment, farming deep-sea vents, or guiding the migration of prey species over generations, acting as the secret gardeners of the deep. We send our submarines down with bright lights and loud motors, oblivious to the fact that we might be blundering through a carefully cultivated landscape, disrupting a plan that was set in motion before the Industrial Revolution began. And what happens when these ancient minds finally decide to move? We assume the deep sea is static, a place where nothing ever changes. But if these creatures are truly intelligent, they must be noticing the changes we are forcing upon them. The warming waters are creeping deeper. The plastic is raining down like toxic snow. The abyssal philosophers might be realizing that their sanctuary is being breached. If a creature that has lived for centuries decides that it is time to act, it won't be a sudden, frantic attack. It will be a slow, unstoppable shift, a rising tide of calculated resistance that we won't even recognize until it's too late. So, the next time you look at a picture of the dark, empty ocean, don't feel comforted by its silence. Feel the weight of it. Feel the pressure of millions of tons of water hiding things that are older and wiser than we are. The horror isn't that there are monsters in the deep. The horror is that the monsters might be geniuses. They are down there right now, floating in the eternal night, thinking thoughts that are as long and deep as the trenches they call home. And perhaps, just perhaps, they are waiting for us to stop making so much noise so they can finally be heard. We have explored the solitary genius of the octopus and the terrifying potential of the hive mind. But now we arrive at a concept that feels like it was pulled straight from the pages of a science fiction novel: civilization. When we think of technology, we think of fire, metal, and electricity, things that are impossible to forge in the watery depths. Because of this, we have arrogantly assumed that the ocean is a place of pure biology, devoid of invention. But what if we are wrong? What if the path to civilization doesn't require fire at all? What if, in the alien pressure of the trenches, a different kind of tool-making has been evolving, one that uses the very bodies of the ocean's inhabitants as its raw material? Imagine a creature that doesn't build machines, but breeds them. We already know that some marine animals, like the blanket octopus, ripped the stinging tentacles off Portuguese man-o'-wars and wield them as toxic whips. This is a crude, brutal form of tool use. Now, fast-forward this behavior by a few million years of evolution. Picture a society of deep-sea dwellers that has domesticated electric eels to power their homes, or cultivated bioluminescent bacteria to light their cities. They wouldn't need copper wires or light bulbs. They would have living, breathing batteries and lamps. This is biotechnology in its most literal and horrifying sense. A civilization built on the manipulation of flesh rather than the smelting of ore. The evidence for this kind of sophistication might already be hiding in plain sight. We often find strange, geometric patterns on the seafloor, perfect circles, intricate mandalas in the sand. We dismiss them as mating rituals of pufferfish, but what if some of them are foundations? What if the forests of tube worms we see near thermal vents are not wild growth, but carefully planted crops, tended by unseen farmers who harvest the bacteria they contain? The ocean is vast enough to hide entire agricultural revolutions in its canyons, revolutions that rely on chemistry and biology rather than steel and wheel. Let's push this thought experiment further. On land, we built our world by conquering the environment. Underwater, you don't conquer the water. You flow with it. A marine civilization might not build static cities of stone that fight the current. They might weave immense, drifting structures out of kelp and cartilage, cities that migrate with the seasons. These wandering metropolises would be invisible to our sonar, appearing as nothing more than dense shoals of fish or debris. We could be sailing right over the roofs of a nomadic empire, mistaking their architecture for nature, simply because it doesn't look like a building to us. The most chilling aspect of this hypothetical civilization is the potential for weaponry. If you can't forge a sword, you weaponize toxicity. We know the ocean is full of the deadliest poisons on the planet: tetrodotoxin, conotoxins, venoms that can stop a heart in seconds. A sophisticated marine culture could harvest these toxins, concentrating them into projectiles or releasing them into currents to create invisible minefields around their territory. They wouldn't fight with explosions. They would fight with silent, chemical warfare, turning the water itself into a lethal weapon against any intruder. And what about their culture, their art? Without paper or stone to record their history, they might use the medium of the ocean itself: sound. Whales can sing songs that travel for thousands of miles. An advanced marine species could encode their entire history, their laws, and their scientific knowledge into complex, multi-layered songs that echo eternally through the deep sound channel. To us, it sounds like haunting, ambient noise. To them, it is a library, a living oral tradition that connects every individual across the globe in a web of song. We listen to the ocean and hear static. They listen and hear their ancestors speaking. This brings us to a moment of existential vertigo. We search the cosmos for technological signatures, radio waves, Dyson spheres, assuming that intelligence always looks like us. But a marine civilization would be the ultimate stealth society. They wouldn't emit radio waves. They wouldn't burn fossil fuels. They wouldn't leave a carbon footprint. They would be perfectly integrated into their ecosystem, leaving no trace that we could easily recognize as artificial. We could be looking at a planet that is already inhabited by two advanced civilizations, one on the dry crust and one in the wet deep, separated by a barrier harder to cross than the vacuum of space. So, as we send our robotic probes down into the trenches, we need to be prepared for what we might find. We are looking for simple microbes, for dumb beasts. But what if we find a tool made of obsidian lying on a shelf of rock? What if we find a corral of domesticated sea pigs? What if we find a structure that is undeniably built but not by human hands? The discovery of the toolmakers of the trench would shatter our understanding of history. It would mean that we have never been alone, and that while we were busy playing with fire, our neighbors downstairs were quietly mastering the dark. So here we are, standing at the edge of the water, looking out at a horizon that feels endless and empty. We have spent the last century gazing upward, building radio telescopes to comb the stars for a whisper of intelligent life. We have crafted equations, like the Fermi paradox, to explain the deafening silence of the cosmos, wondering why the universe feels so lonely. But in our obsession with the sky, we have committed a colossal oversight. We have been shouting, "Is anyone there?" into the void of space, while ignoring the possibility that the answer has been swimming beneath our keels for millions of years. The real question isn't, are we alone in the universe? It is, are we even alone on Earth? Think about the sheer hubris of our search. We assume that intelligence must look like us, bipedal, terrestrial, fire-wielding. We look for radio waves and city lights, for the signatures of a civilization that conquered its environment. But the ocean teaches us that there are other ways to win the game of life. A marine intelligence wouldn't need to broadcast its presence. It would be content to exist in the perfect, fluid silence of the deep. We might be sharing our planet with a neighbor so distinct, so fundamentally different in its philosophy of existence, that we have mistaken its silence for absence. The aliens we dream of meeting might not be arriving in spaceships. They might be rising from the trenches. Consider the implications of the abyssal philosophers or the reef hive mind. If these intelligences exist, then we are not the landlords of Earth. We are merely the tenants of the dry land, living in ignorance of the true masters of the planet. We treat the ocean as a pantry and a garbage dump, oblivious to the fact that we might be dumping our waste into the living room of a civilization older than our own. It's a chilling thought. What if they have been watching us this whole time? Not with malice, perhaps, but with the cold, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a chaotic experiment in a petri dish. This perspective shifts the horror from the fear of the unknown to the fear of judgment. If the ocean is waking up, or if it has been awake all along, then it has witnessed our entire history. It has tasted the fallout of our nuclear tests, felt the vibrations of our wars, and choked on the plastic of our convenience. A sentient ocean wouldn't just be an ecosystem, it would be a witness. And if the day comes when that witness decides to testify, what will it say about us? The silence of the deep might not be emptiness. It might be patience. A long, holding breath before the inevitable exhale. We are currently destroying the terrestrial world at a breakneck pace, burning the libraries of nature before we have even read the titles. But the ocean is vast, deep, and resilient. As the surface becomes uninhabitable, the deep sea might become the final refuge of complexity on Earth. It is entirely possible that the future of intelligence on this planet does not belong to the apes who learned to split the atom, but to the cephalopods who learned to edit their own genetic code. We might just be a flash in the pan, a brief, noisy interlude in a history written in ink and salt. Imagine a future, thousands of years from now, when the cities of man have crumbled into dust. The satellites have fallen, the radio waves have faded, and the land is silent. But in the ocean, the lights are just turning on. The reef cities are glowing with bioluminescence. The abyssal philosophers are singing their long, slow songs, and a new civilization is rising from the depths to inherit the Earth. They will look at the ruins of our skyscrapers not as monuments, but as fossils, strange geologic formations left behind by a species that burned too bright and died too young. So, the next time you find yourself by the sea, don't just look at the waves. Look through them. Peer into that dark, heavy blue and try to catch the eye of the thing that is looking back. We are not the main characters in this story. We are just the ones telling it right now. The ocean isn't empty, and it isn't finished. It is waiting. It is evolving. And in the deep, crushing dark, where the pressure is strong enough to turn coal into diamond, something new is being forged. The final thought I want to leave you with is this. We have spent so much time wondering if we could communicate with an alien mind, never asking if that mind would even want to talk to us. Maybe the silence of the ocean isn't because they can't speak. Maybe it's because they have nothing to say to a species that is busy poisoning its own home. The ultimate horror isn't that they are coming for us. It's that they are simply waiting for us to leave. The ocean is patient. It has all the time in the world. And eventually it will have the world all to itself.